Yes. Yes. You just asked me that fucking question. All right.
Even when I thought I was cool, I still respected all these old guys. You know, I was in awe of them. I mean, they'd been around. They were characters. I just posted on Facebook the other day. I go, are there any characters left, you know? Lyle Tuttle said, well, there probably are, but you can't see the forest for the tree. I mean, these guys were like pirates, you know. They were just, you know, traveling, carny, you know, whatever, to make a living. So they were real colorful people. You know, they didn't just go, well, what's your credentials? Well, I graduated from art school. Well, I don't care. I'd rather, you know, Dave Paul was in the Korean War. Lyle Tuttle was wounded in Korea. Rough and tumble guys, you know, that dealt in rough areas of the neighborhood. I guess it's just a more romantic notion to me than now this blur of hipsters, as we call them, you know. And like I said, each to their own, you know. Dana Brunson, I'm a tattooist, and I don't know, 66-year-old guy. Yeah. Came back from Vietnam, didn't care a thing about tattoos. I grew up in Indiana where the shops were closed in the 60s, so I wasn't exposed to much of it. And I went with a buddy to get he was getting a Zigzag Man or something, and I watched it, and I thought, oh, that's kind of cool, it'd be neat to learn. You know, I had a year and a half to do, and I'd always been into art, so I just asked the guy how you learn, and, you know, he'd give me the old Zeiss school of tattooing, and then I went up to the other shop, which was D.C. Paul's shop, which was formerly Spalding and Rogers' shop. He was their apprentice. And ended up paying him. Didn't have a tattoo on me. Didn't think I'd get a tattoo. It was just, you know, I always say if there had been a blacksmith there, I'd have been a blacksmith. It was something to spin my wheels after the Army time. You know, I was into bikes. I'd hang out at bike shops. But then, you know, once you get into tattooing, that was it. There went 45 years of it. I was there like about a year. It was all military, some bikers, no black people at all, no Afro-Americans, and maybe one woman came in that whole time. It was home of the 82nd Airborne, and Green Berets, so it was a lot of military tattoos, but of course there's always local biker clubs. Did a lot of those. Dave Paul rode a big old Harley dresser and had friends that owned the motorcycle shop I hung in. So, and I had choppers and stuff, you know, because I'd had them before I went in the Army, so as soon as I got home I had one. And yeah, it was just, you know, outer crust.
What year are we talking?
1971. Dave was kind of, you know, here's how you do it. You know, he wasn't a great teacher, you know. He was a good tattooist. He'll show you how to make needles, you know, a little bit about machines, how to cut stencils. You know, he helped clean. You know, you were just a handyman, kind of. You were just lucky if somebody even took you on, because I think when I learned to tattoo, I heard there was only 200 or 300 tattoo shops left. I mean, completely, in 71. It was just a dying. There were 2 at Fort Bragg. That's the biggest tattoo shop, biggest Army base in the United States. Now there's probably, you know, 22 on a street or something. But it was almost a dead trade, really.
Pretty much was just afraid of my father. He's a fucking nut job. You know, I love him. But, you know, growing up, it's that one fear that he put in when all those other guys are getting tattooed at 14, 15, 16. Yeah, I wasn't one of them. And in the end, I'm very grateful that I wasn't, you know? It's kind of like moving in with him and going to school. I got my high school diploma, you know? Yeah.
Dana was good friends with Cliff Raven, was getting tattooed by Cliff Raven. Interesting, Dana used to actually drive from Ohio to LA to get tattooed by Cliff Raven because he couldn't fly, because he had anxiety. So it's just, I mean, that dedication to want somebody's work that much, to drive cross country to get it, is unheard of nowadays. You know, people just wouldn't do that, you know. But the Brunsons are I don't know, they're like the best people I ever met in my life. They're just like, Dana's full of history and tradition and integrity. It's amazing, You know, like I've just never met anybody like him.
Mainly, I had a motorcycle shop. It was illegal in Indiana, so I'd drag my equipment out when all the bikers wanted tattooed. I'd go to some swap meets, motorcycle swap meets. And then the first convention was '76 in Houston, Texas. Dave Yerkew put that on. And I went to that. And I knew my brother went. Cliff Raven was there that I got tattooed by in Chicago. And DC Paul that taught me was there. And that's all I knew. And it was all these old guys that were, you know, you're like in awe of. You know, I mean, it was just totally tattooed. You know, they were probably in their 50s, but they looked old to me. You know?
Like when you went to a motorcycle swap, what was that setup like? You just in a booth?
Just a table with my tattoo equipment, a bunch of beer, a bunch of bikers I know. You know, by the end of the day, you'd be all drunked up and still trying to tattoo. I mean, that's just the way it was, you know. I mean, for years, you know, bikers bring over, I tattooed out of my house, and they come over and they're all partying, and, you know, it's just, you know, it's a biker thing. I don't know. I've got a lot of friends, you know.
No, that's super cool. That's
Yeah, well, they kept me busy my whole career, and, you know, like I always tell people, don't forget where you come from. So if I tattooed a guy I tattooed 20 years ago, I still give him a break, you know, because that was the lean times. You know, I didn't forget him when tattooing boomed. I know who made me a living. You know, I'd work all weekend on 1%ers and make more than I made working 40 hours a week on a regular job, which, you know, I'd probably make $100 if I worked all weekend busting my ass, you know. But, you know, it paid the way. I moved after '76. I met a guy named Tim McGuire that was partners with a guy named Carl Bliley over here. Tim came back home after that convention, opened his own shop because he was working part-time with Carl. Carl was like a world-class gun engraver, and Tim was working at Tandy Leather or something. So Tim opened his shop and invited me over, so I moved over here in '77. I went down to Texas to go to graduate school. My major was sculpture in college. And then I stayed 6 months, you know, and I thought, well, I got to make a plan. Texas was real expensive at the time. It's kind of the oil boom. I had a scholarship, but, you know, I went to SMU in Dallas. But Tim had offered me the night shift. He worked noon till 5. Well, hell, no tattoo shops open noon till 5. So I came over and worked 5 till 9 for, you know, 11 years with him. So I owe him a great deal of gratitude for having me over because, you know, it worked out great for me. We were downtown Cincinnati at 9th and Race. Tim had opened a small store because, like I said, the one he had worked in was just part-time. So he was tired of working for minimum wage at the leather shop. So after the '76 convention, he said he was hitchhiking home in the snow and he decided to open a shop. And then he invited me, but it was almost, man, it was almost all bikers, the weird rebel that would wander in. Few girls getting little butterflies, that was starting to pick up. You know, Tuttle made all that hippie stuff, you know, real popular. He rescued tattooing too. And without Lyle, it may have died really. I mean, he was in San Francisco, got the hippies interested. It wasn't a sailor thing. People started getting little peace signs, you know, keep on trucking, weed leaves and stuff. So we'd get a few, but mostly bikers. Well, Paul Rogers was, you know, old tattoo artist that worked with a lot of famous people, you know, Latham Conley, Coleman. You know, Coleman was kind of the father of American tattooing. Paul worked with him. And then in the later years, Paul just went on to be known as the epic machine builder. But he was just a nice guy. He was willing to share all the history with you, show you everything he knew. There wasn't any secrets if you went to visit him in Florida in his trailer, which I went several times and videotaped him, and just a nice man. Just a guy, if you could just set your sights to be like Paul Rogers, you'd do something, you know. Cliff Raven, Don Nolan, and Ed Hardy. Those were the three top trendsetters of the day. You thought they were untouchable as far as ability, you know. Don tattooed Cliff and Ed Hardy. I've got a lot of tattoos from Nolan. I've got a lot from Raven. I didn't get any from Hardy because I didn't know him until later in my career, and you know, he was pretty much kind of semi-retired. Now he is retired, but he certainly did a lot great for tattooing. You know, Ed Hardy, regardless what, you know, these young guys think he just instantly became rich. He put his licks in since he was a kid. You know, I have great respect for Ed as an artist. He's an artist that tattooed, you know. Yeah, he had a degree in printmaking from San Francisco. And then Cliff had a degree, and then Don Nolan was just a prolific artist, oil painter, sculptor. So they were it. Boy, when I started, if you could tattoo like them, you had it, you know, I mean. Had a little more mystique back then, you know, or a lot more mystique. It was, hell, I'm about scared to go in the first shop I saw. You know, you just didn't walk in and say how cool you were, and you respected it. And
Granger is a bad motherfucker.
There was a cop named Artie Nolan who hated us. I mean, hated us, man. And he was a borough cop, and Bob lived in the borough. So having a party one day at his house, big pig roast, and music's going and shit. And Artie Nolan pulls up in the patrol car. He's like, you know, you fucking hippies, shut this shit down, you know. And
Nobody likes this guy.
and he didn't like us. We didn't like him, you know. So Rob comes out, and he's like, hey, man, get off my property. It was like, you pig motherfucker, you know, you bacon motherfucker, you know. And he's yelling at Rob, you fucking scummy hippie, you know, you turn the music down. And Bob's saying, fuck, get off my fucking property. So my friend Kevin was in the backyard, and somebody says, hey, Dino's getting into it with Artie Nolan, cop. So Kevin, he was a photographer, still is a photographer, and one of the best. And he comes around with his trusty Nikon. This is before digital cameras now. It was all like
So you don't know where you're getting.
You don't know what you're getting till you get it developed. So Kevin comes around the corner with his Nikon, and these cats are getting into it. I mean, they're like in each other's face. And then they turn to walk away, and Kevin comes around and he snaps this picture. Didn't know what he snapped until he got. You know, he lived in Manhattan, and he still does. No, now he lives in Brooklyn now. Excuse me. So he goes back to Manhattan like a couple days later, and he's in his dark room in his apartment, and he's developing this shit. All of a sudden, he looks at this picture, and so he takes this picture, blows it up to like 8 by 10, sends it to the police station, right? And Artie Nolan and the cop, the chief, is like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" What happens with the picture? They both turned away from each other, and Artie Nolan is in uniform, and he's turned away, and Bob's turned like this, and Artie's over here, and Bob's like this with his hands in his balls, like "fuck you," and Artie Nolan's like this, like giggling, like giving him the finger, and neither of them know what the other one's doing. So Kevin sends that to the police station, and the chief of police is like, "You're going down to the hippie level? Come on, what are you doing?" But then, as time goes on, you know, it's just like everything else, man. It's like, you know, the Vietnam War. Now we're friends with Vietnam. You know, everything changes. Everybody mellows out. And somebody from Matawan had just told me that Artie Nolan retired a few years back, and at his retirement, the backdrop to the I guess what do you call it, dais, where everybody sits up there at the big table, right, was that picture blown up like 6 feet, and it was his favorite picture.
as a kid, man, I saw a guy on like a chopped Triumph or something, and I thought, wow, I don't know, it just worked for me. You know, nobody in my family was into bikes, so I had a mini bike in high school. And as soon as I got out of high school, before I went in the Army, I got a job, and I bought a 50 panhead chopper with a suicide clutch. It was my first bike. And, you know, I just thought I was so cool. Well, I was cool. Everybody was riding Honda Dreams and all, you know, I got a 50 panhead with a ratchet top, and it was just a piece of shit, you know, but I was cool, man, you know.
Very cool.
And it's just one of those things, you love looking at them. I don't know. I don't ride them as much as I should, but I have a big collection of them, and they're just artwork to me. I just love them. You know, I love looking at them. Well, it was me and my wife's brother, you know, kind of wannabe, you know, bikers. There were some small 1%er gangs, I mean, large names, but small gangs in Indianapolis. And then there was the wannabe guys that I'd kind of hang out with, you know, 5 or 6 of us would get together and ride. And few guys bike builders, you know, it'd be molding frames and building bikes and turning tubes for front ends. You know, it was just fun. It was a real, I don't know, off the wall, you know, group of guys. I mean, I've got a dual carburetor 47 knuckle, you know, it's a hot rod. I bought it, was an old chopper, and tore it down, and kind of before the distress thing had barely started, and I painted it and distressed it so it looked like an old racer. And, You know, it runs great. You know, it was built by, the original motor had been built by a famous guy in Kentucky that passed, used to build K-model racers for Harley. So, you know, 80-inch flywheels, 2-inch car valves. And I had a guy named Steve Miller at the Harley shop redo it, but it's me, you know, it's, I mean, beat you to death, but it's cool, man, it runs good.
I see the future of tattooing in, I'm going to compare this to oil painting. Back in the day, you had oil painters that were masters, and they were greats, and they would make a living on oil painting. They would sell their art, people would come to them for their art, and they were able to make a living. Now oil painting has become more of a hobby because it's so thinned out. So many people oil paint, so many people are oil painters. I think what's happening with tattooing is it's going to thin out, and people are going to tattoo for a hobby, tattoo for fun, and just a select group of people will make money at it.
Pete, go back to LA.